Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Switch Statement Podcast. It's a podcast for investigations into miscellaneous tech topics. Hey, John, how are you doing?
Hey, Matt, how are you?
I am doing all right. We have a special episode today. Every once in a blue moon. How often are blue moons?
Dude, I have no idea. I don't even know what a blue moon is, to be honest. Maybe.
A blue moon is when you have a full moon twice in 1 month.
Oh, that doesn't seem nearly as cool as I was hoping.
Dude, you would think it was like some crazy astrological event,
right?
Astronomical event. I don't know
or that the moon is like more blue than usual or something.
You would think that, because there is a blood moon, and that is when it's actually red.
Right, that looks awesome.
But anyway, the event is that we have a special guest today.
Yes.
Dr. Jeremy Baddock. Should we refer to you as Dr. Baddock?
Just call me Jeremy.
All right.
Darn.
So we have Jeremy on the line to talk about genetics and just a grab bag of other things. But yeah. So I think just to kick it off, can you introduce yourself? What do you do? Why are you here?
Sure. My name is Jeremy Baddock. I'm from the same town Matt is. I won't dox you, Matt. We went to middle school and high school together, went to different engineering colleges. I was biomed undergrad and master's. Then I went to New Jersey Medical School for med school, Cooper University Hospital in South Jersey for general surgery residency. And now I'm finishing my trauma and critical care surgery fellowship in University of Louisville.
Okay, so what do I need to do to myself to get you to work on me?
You need to get shot, stabbed, or something inside you has to go terribly wrong, in which you would require emergency surgery. Or
Nice.
If you have some big surgery like a liver transplant or big cancer surgery, you can end up in the ICU under my care.
Where do I sign up if I wanted to like give my liver to someone?
You could give a piece of your liver to someone. You can't give your whole liver to someone unless you are. That's a whole nother complex conversation that we could get into. But the ethics of liver transplant, death, donation after cardiac death versus donation after brain death, and all of that stuff. But you could give a piece of your liver to someone.
If you mark to give your organs at death, and that's like on your license, do the cops like kill you when they find you at the site of an accident?
No, so that's a big misconception. Not cops in general, but that people are afraid that doctors will try less hard if they see that you're an organ donor. But the teams involved with taking care of you and the teams involved with getting the organ are completely divested from each other. And even the OPOs, the organ procurement organizations that have those conversations with you are not part of the hospital and not part of the system. So we're not even involved in those conversations and generally have no idea where the organ goes. Sometimes we know if they were placed somewhere after someone died, but we don't know like to specific individuals or where they're going.
Oh, nice.
I actually have a crazy like law related point here, which is for a very long time, if you severely injured someone, but they didn't die, they could have a good claim against you because like they suffered as a result of you harming them. However, if you killed them, there was nothing for them to do. There was no one alive that you had harmed that could recover from your harming them. So these train companies were like just operating. It was like the Wild West. And if they hurt someone, they would be like, all right, we got to finish this guy off because otherwise we could be liable for his injuries.
Wait, so these are like managers building railroads, just killing their employees because they like hit themselves in the shin with a sledgehammer or something.
I don't think it was employees. I think it was like people who were walking along the right of way of a train.
Oh,
So this is how conversations with me and Matt generally go. Like I called him after the last episode and talked to him about genetics, and where the plan was to talk about genetics, but me and Matt just quickly,
you're
you know,
perfect. You are absolutely perfect for this podcast.
We can make this a recurring segment. So anyway, you are a trauma surgeon.
yes. So I'm finishing my fellowship. I finish in July, but I'm board certified in trauma, critical care, and also general surgery. So if you wanted me to operate on you for hernia or for to get your gallbladder out, I could also do that. You don't have to be critically ill for me to operate on you.
Nice. I have always wanted to like have like an elective surgery just to like I don't know, like a tune up, take out any of the unnecessary bits.
That's another thing. Every single surgery comes with side effects and like lifelong, like uh, even like getting a C-section, you have a lifetime risk of developing a small bowel obstruction from adhesions in your abdomen, and that's something that's done fairly often. So think about like hernias and other things like that. That's lifetime risk of small bowel obstruction, having to come back to the hospital. It's not ideal.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. But a guy can dream. So in the last episode, we talked a lot about like the DNA code and kind of how it represents information. But I think where it might dovetail with your practice is there any gene therapy or the care you provide is much more like acute in nature. So I would assume not,
Yeah.
but
So like in trauma, we're just starting to get like interested in like microbiome and personalized medicine to see how different people react to trauma and how long it takes them to revert to a baseline metabolic state. And that could be person to person dependent, but that's just the beginning. In surgical oncology and a lot more things are being done with gene therapy and basically targeting of cancer and things like that. Um, so I could just speak specifically to cancer. So the only time I think I've physically ever been involved in gene therapy was in melanoma, in some stages of melanoma when it's beyond surgery. There, an FDA cleared treatment is called TVEC, which stands for Talimogene laherpivec, which is a herpes virus that
Mhm.
you inject directly into the melanoma,
Mm.
and the herpes virus codes for uh, granulocyte macrophage colony stimulating factor. So when those cells die, they release their own natural proteins, cancer like abnormal proteins probably, but also this factor that causes macrophages to come in. The macrophages and immune system recognize now that these proteins are not human, and they can do a better job of attacking the melanoma. This
And
is
a lot of what you're saying is kind of going above my head. I don't know about
Yeah,
you, John,
very high
but
yeah.
level.
but yeah. So melanoma, that is skin cancer. Is that right?
Yeah, so melanoma skin cancer in general, and actually University of Louisville has like done a lot of groundbreaking research in the surgical aspect of melanoma. But melanoma normally, if you catch it early, it's a pretty large incision to take out of melanoma. So if it's at a adequate depth, you need 2 centimeter margins. So a
Hmm.
melanoma that is like maybe the head of a pencil. Imagine like 2 inches almost, or not 2 inches, inches on every side, but it's an
Hmm.
inch circle and you can't whack out circles of people, so you have to make it an ellipse so you can close it again, just topographically. So that's even a bigger incision. So you could have a pretty large incision to deal with a very tiny
So
melanoma.
you're saying
Once that
instead
met,
rub herpes on it?
so no, so it's still the standard of care to do that for melanomas that are size appropriate. And again, I'm not a surgical oncologist. So the first thing I want to say when having these conversations, like anything in medicine and in life, like I'm not an expert in tariffs. I'm not going to talk about tariffs. I'm not an expert in melanoma. I'm an expert in trauma, acute care, and critical care surgery. So I will get that out of the way that I'm not giving advice and I'm not I'm not giving medical advice, and I'm also not an expert in this area. But I have partaken in residency. We do rotations in surgical oncology, colorectal, thoracic surgery, did some cardiac surgery, vascular, pediatric, burn, um, transplant. So we do all of it. So we have a little bit of knowledge and everything before we specialize or become general surgeons. But basically, this specific instance is a melanoma that's too far gone to get a surgery, so it's another mechanism to deal with it. But surgery would, if you could have surgery, that'd be the ideal thing to do if it was the right stage.
So can I ask a question about this? Because, and I'm so naive, I'm probably going to ask a really dumb question. But what I'm hearing is you're essentially like hacking. You're attacking a cancer, melanoma, with this other virus. And this is where I said herpes. You said herpes, right? Or did I just make that up?
Herpes virus, yeah.
Okay. Okay, sorry. I'm like, am I just hearing herpes left and right? But
No.
you're basically like putting herpes in there so that our body responds to it, and the you're saying the herpes breaks down, drops all these proteins so that our body knows how to attack the cancer better.
So immunotherapy is like a really complicated topic. You could spend an entire semester talking about your immune system. But basically, all of your cells are taking little bits of protein that like they destroy and putting it on their cell surface at all times.
Right.
And immune cells are coming by and say, "Hey, this is I recognize this as being human, so I'm not going to kill this cell." And that's a defense against viruses, basically. At the same time, there's other cells or the same cells in instances where are just like mining the outside of cells, saying, "Hey, what's over here?" When a cell dies, what was in it? To see, for like that kind of helps with bacteria recognition more. Um, so your body's doing that all at all times.
Right.
The cancer they've found does a great job of convincing cells around it and converting those cells to like acquiescent state almost to say
Hmm.
like we're normal, like this is normal stuff, and it secretes hormones basically that the immune cells will not attack it. They'll just chill there and say, and then those immune cells will send out signals saying, "Hey, everything's normal over here. Everything's normal over here."
Yeah.
So what this does is not the killing of the cancer cell is not that important here, but it's the killing of the cancer cell, bringing in of new immune cells that recognize now that these proteins are a problem. So then your immune system can attack it
Right.
moving forward.
Yeah, and this actually kind of leads to the actual question I wanted to ask. Like that was a great sort of foundation for this. We discussed this in our last episode, but recently Google DeepMind, as an organization, I want to say they finally solved this great problem in biology of protein folding, where they came up with some sort of series of large language models or some sorts of
Mm.
models, neural networks that are able to fold proteins in all of the various formations. And what I'm wondering is how much does that allow us to, you know, quote unquote hack the human body, like basically come up with novel proteins that we can like put in various parts of our body to like force, other parts of our body to kind of respond in certain ways, produce maybe more nutrients that we might need, or um
Mm.
I mean, I don't know if that question makes sense, but
It does, but it's more important to know the proteins that are there and how they interact. At the like again, that it's not saying that their breakthrough is important. It's important for understanding like even like prion disease. Like if do you know what prions are?
no.
Like mad cow disease and what's it, Creutzfeldt Jakob disease. That's an inheritable disease. Basically, a protein misfolds in the brain
Hmm.
and causes other proteins to misfold as well. So it's like a chain reaction that causes a disease, but it's like it's like the basis of this chapter almost like the most simple form of self-replication. This is not an alive thing. It's a protein. One could argue that that's not alive, but yet it is replicating and causing other proteins to misfold. So that would be important in that aspect, and some other things predicting how proteins can interact, things like
Yeah.
that. But for treatment, it's more important, and we're is getting to understand how the hormones we have work. Like again, we're just finding out how these was it the GLP-1
Hmm.
medications are starting to work for inhibiting appetite. Like that's a hormone that exists in our body already. We just had to find out kind of how to make it and what it does.
Right.
and the effects it has on the body and things like that.
So we
So
need to learn more about this like menagerie of different protein shapes is like step one, kind
yeah,
of.
in med school, we're getting lectured by like biochemists and oncologists, things like this, who like are working on one pathway, like of in the cell and like trying to push it to the next step. And so that's across the body. Like everyone's trying to understand a little bit more about that. If you look up like the steroid pathway, it's insane. It just says steroid in cell, multiple things happen. Like it's not really understood. They just know that steroid turns on a lot of genes like corticosteroids
Hmm.
like corticosteroid enters cell, multiple things happen, and that's the end of it. Like, whereas other processes are more like delineated very well. But that again is difficult because steroids act on the DNA, where other processes may act in the cytoplasm or otherwise.
So this actually, I think this kind of dovetails with a question that I think, I mean, it's probably an enormous topic, but something that has always felt like magic to me, which is like the process by which your body kind of like knows how to like differentiate and like how like the genes kind of govern the geometry of the body. And I'm
Yeah,
not
and
sure.
that's another whole course. It's like embryogenesis and growing and from a single cell to blastocyst and mesoderm, endoderm, ectoderm, like those three layers. Germ, then that forms different like skin or muscle, like all those progenitor cells. And they just recently had a breakthrough in that in dedifferentiation. Like I think I looked it up because. You had kind of briefed me on what we are going to talk about, but
Differentiation.
dedifferentiation. So, like in 2006 was the first time, from my quick research, that they were able to turn a differentiated cell back into a pluripotent cell. But this year was the first time they went from one cell type to another cell type without going back to the pluripotent middle stage. So they turned a neuron to a skin cell without going back to its kind of middle stage.
Huh.
A brain neuron to a skin cell?
Yeah, like yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
That sounds amazing. Sounds like important research. But did they have like a goal?
That could be potentially important for cancer research. That could be important for like regeneration and things like that. Um, but this is something that like basically almost all plants can do by themselves. Like, if you like chop off something of a plant,
Right.
any plant can kind of regrow from what it has. A root cell can become a whatever cell or help regenerate that part of it without having any issue.
Do you think that's something that we could give humans the ability to do? Someone chops off my arm and like a salamander, a new arm grows.
Well, like, with the future, anything's possible. I can't give you a timeline on that, but with
You're
with
saying there's nothing
research, anything's possible.
physically to stop, to prevent such a thing, but um,
No, it'd be incredibly complex and difficult and require years and years and years of research. It'd be
yeah.
much easier to do that if you lost an arm as like a baby or an infant or a fetus. Like just healing in general in children is completely amazing compared to adults. Even in like when we do small bowel anastomosis, which is like connection between small bowel and like adults, you have like either use a stapler or put lots of stitches in, and like infants or kids, you put a couple stitches in and you walk away. And I had a pediatric surgery attending, which you would do like 4 or 5 sutures and go stem cells and walk away. Like because they have a lot of stem cells available that can help with healing.
Amazing. So we discuss large language models a lot on this podcast because we're kind of obsessed with them. And I'm
Mhm.
curious if you have, you come across those occasionally, or people discuss potentially using them for research, like to understand these mechanisms in the human
Yeah.
body.
So a lot of surgical publications are coming out now with like AI model to do this or AI model to do that, and it's like a huge buzzword that gets you published these days. But it's not really as beneficial as one could imagine because the benefits of using these large language models comes when there's so much data that humans can't like do the work.
Right.
But generally, we're not working with databases that have like all like any information you can imagine. Like in our there's a something called the NISQIP, and it's a database of you don't have to be a part of it, but basically it's a national database where like hospitals input their surgical data, and I'm sure there's databases like this for other specialties as well, but for like this is for general surgery, so I can look up. And again, it's not individualized. I can't see like where it happened or what happened, but I could see like what procedures someone got, what if they were a smoker, if they were had heart failure, and then like the outcomes, 30-day outcomes, basically, usually.
Hmm.
Like if they died within 30 days, if they were all that stuff. But that's not that much information. It doesn't tell me how many packs a day this person smoked. It doesn't tell me how many years they smoked for. Like that alone. So it's not very granular data on these big databases to actually need some huge model to delineate them. Yes, there is incredible use probably for these large language models and again more basic science research where you're looking at genomes like genomics between different patients. If you have that data and you have these like millions of base pairs and you're looking for differences and you have a lot of results, that'd probably be very helpful. But when I have like maybe a database of like 100 different variables and most of them are not showing up on univariate analysis and maybe a couple are pinging on multivariate analysis, do I really need AI to like really churn extra numbers for me, or can I just have a statistician do that for me?
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it seems as though, like, I feel like these AIs work well in these problems where you have like data that's sort of an input, and then you have results, like known results as an output, and you just train a model to sort of become this black box, which can convert this input data into this, these magic output results, and you don't even really know how this black box works. And as I was reading Gödel, Escher, Bach, a lot of these like biological processes were sort of coming across to me that way. And I'm sure this is a lot in large part because of my own biases, but it just seemed like there might be just interesting ways to use that technology to help us like, understand some of these very mystifying, like hyper complicated interactions.
No, 100%. And that's why it's probably more helpful for these basic science and or something where you have lots of data in medicine. And again, people, even though that's not the case generally in surgery, people are trying, attempting to use it for any database they have, where before maybe they weren't even sure what to look for. And they're just like, hey, can you putting this data in to see if they get anything out of it?
Yeah.
Are you saying, Jeremy, that the way that it might work is a patient comes in and you consult the AI that's been trained on your own personal database as to what it thinks might be the most effective interventions? Is that how you're imagining it might work?
Yeah, and they did that even before AI, like just with the information they had, but like even like for trauma, for example, like you could tell, like I could put eye color, I could put all these things into a database to tell you how sick a patient is, but at the end of the day, vital signs like your blood pressure is very important. So like a lot of that stuff falls away and nothing will be more important than blood pressure. Like for any model that like if you get in a car accident, I don't care if it's a Tuesday and you're this ethnicity and you're an athlete, if your blood pressure is 60 over 40, you're not doing well and you need like intervention.
Yeah, I feel like I have to use this opportunity to ask you another question because there was a chapter in Gödel, Escher, Bach that maybe for me was like my favorite chapter, where he was discussing the brain. And he went down all of these tangents. Like he had this section about a grandma neuron. I don't know if they discussed that in med school, but I guess for a while there was this theory that, oh, maybe there's a neuron in your brain that like whenever you think about your grandma, this neuron is lighting up. And obviously that's not the case. But anyway, he posited that when you really break it down, the actual things that are taking place in the brain are fairly simple. You have neurons that are transmitting electricity. And then you have this, I guess, glia, I think is what it was called, which is like this structure of the brain, which sort of determines how the neurons can sort of move around the brain. And as you age, this glia sort of erodes and this structure gets more and more hardened, I guess. And the structure of your brain becomes more and more concrete. And he also discusses this point, which is like a lot of these higher level intellectual capabilities that humans have, like having a sense of self or having the ability to distinguish between, I think he used the term classes and instances, although I might just be conflating programming terminology, but basically like discussing the concept of a president versus like the instance of a president, Barack Obama or Donald Trump. Like these are higher level mental faculties that say animals don't have. But the underlying mechanisms that are powering these faculties are kind of the same as other animals. It's just that in humans, it's at such a order of magnitude larger scale. And I just found that to be like so interesting that just from this vastness of scale that you have this emergence of almost these like new cognitive abilities. And I'm sure I'm understanding it in the simplified way. And I'm sure also that Douglas Hofstadter was simplifying it. So I kind of want to use this opportunity to like discuss this with you. And, you probably have more of a background in this sort of thing and just get your take on this.
Yeah, I mean they've just started like being able to map, I think like very I forget which animal it was, very rudimentary like insect neuron pathways. It's very like so we're not close to this at all for the brain. And that now that you're saying that, that's a good instance of using large language models and interpreting signals from the brain and getting outputs. Like previously there was like these EEG headsets and you could do like some math and try to figure out, oh, this when the signal went, your arm moved. But that'd be a great instance for that. But again, you need lots of data for that. You would need lots of sensors on the brain to give you data to predict that. But going back to your question, it's not as simple as one would think because there's a lot of different neurotransmitters, a lot of different feedback loops, and the complexity is significant because of that. You don't have input output, you have different inputs being supplied to the same output. You have loops, and then you have like if you like about addiction and tolerance that happens in individual cells. So if one neuron is getting constant information from its other neuron, it will just downregulate receptors and not respond as much to it basically.
Yeah.
So there's constant adaptation, and you're right, there's constant growth in childhood that slowly whittles away to what's needed. And again, I don't know if it was evolutionary due to the fact that we were getting hit in our head earlier in our evolution and required that neuroplasticity. Again, when we see trauma patients, kids that get significant TBIs have much better outcomes than if you're 90 and you bonk your head, that could be the end.
Did you say TBI?
Sorry, doctor speak. Traumatic brain injury.
I think the one last question that I think would be interesting to hear from your perspective, how you see your practice evolving and things on the roadmap for technology that is advancing your practice. Like, how is that evolving? And when are we going to get a crazy healing device like the machine from Elysium?
Everything is slow in medicine. You need FDA clearance. You need all these things to be in place before you can implement them. So everything is slower in medicine and research until it's proven to be effective. For that healing device in Elysium, that first you need the diagnostic aspect of that alone is going to be difficult. I think at University of Louisville, there's like one LLM that's like approved to be used that like, I don't remember if it detects pneumonia or pneumothorax. I forget what it detects, but like it gives the radiologist a little ping to say like, hey, I think this is yes or no to this one specific disease. So to get to there to actually intervening in the body is a whole different thing. Like right now, intuitive surgical, the robotic Da Vinci, basically the robotic surgery thing, that has the highest potential for automation in the future. Just think of it as if they were able to log every surgeon's steps, like they could potentially mimic them. But at the same time, you need the diagnostic. So we're just at the forefront of the. Again, I haven't seen this in person, but I've read about it and seen videos about it. Like assisting in the OR, you put a thing in, it says, I think this is this, I think that is that, to assist with dissection and avoiding injury to other structures in cases.
So this is like a heads up display while you're operating, and it can kind of like overlay.
Ooh.
Yeah. And I've actually dealt with not that heads up display, but there's a medication we give now that when we're doing either a robot surgery or even open surgery, if you have like the special lens that you look through, it basically lights up where there's good blood flow. So that can
Mm.
help us when we make anastomosis to make sure that there's good blood flow on both sides, but also gets excreted into the biliary system, which is in your like your gallbladder or liver, so that you can give it right as you're doing the case. And if there's a lot of scar tissue or difficulty there, you kind of see the biliary system so you don't cut the wrong thing, basically. But that, again, hasn't been employed in automated anything yet. But
Wow.
I think we're a fair amount away. So, the only not question I had for you, but what's interesting in genetics is that important things are conserved. And that word is, you don't know what that word means because it's like a biological term, but it
Hmm.
means there's lots of copies of things that are important. So, like
Hmm.
ribosome RNA, that gene is many, many places. Is that a thing that's featured in coding, or like in case of
Like
issues, it's
redundancy?
don't worry, it's redundant. Yeah, basically redundancy, I guess you would say.
Yeah, I mean that's commonly. I mean that's certainly a concept that's used for I don't know things like databases, and I don't know how to tie it to
I
Douglas
think
Hofstadter though.
I think one of the things that would be surprising from a coder's perspective to learn that is there's this concept which is like drilled into you from a very early age in your coding career, which is don't repeat yourself. And the idea is like if you have code that does something in a bunch of different places, your alarm bell should be going off, being like, wait a minute, this is gross because like you're doing the same thing like in a million different places. They're probably all slightly different. So that is kind of surprising, but generally redundancy kind of takes the form of like the code to do this thing is the same, but then we'll run it in a bunch of different places. If I'm drawing a mapping between like a code project and like the human body, it's like, well, the code base is the DNA. And then when I go to run it, that's the human body. And of course, like you're going to have multiple copies of it when you go to run it. But if you're looking at the source code, you really don't want to have more than one copy of it.
Gotcha.
Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah. And then another thing is the other thing that programming doesn't have that I'm aware of is mutation, random mutation, which even it's more pronounced in viruses, which is a problem with viruses mutate quicker than humans, which probably mutate quicker than even fungus. But viruses basically have a faulty polymerase. What they code for themselves, it's known to be faulty. So when they copy their own genome, they're knowingly doing a bad job of it, but they're creating so many offspring that maybe one of them will do better, you know? So that's, I don't think, is present in programming as well. Humans obviously are not trying to do that and the rate of error is a lot lower than viruses, but still happens and leads to evolution.
The thing that came to my mind was there's actually computer viruses that they have self-modifying code.
Hmm.
So because like my understanding is like detecting computer viruses is like they just have this like big list of code that like they've seen before, and it's probably not too dissimilar to like the human immune system where it's like, oh, we encountered this and now we have a list. But then the computer program will kind of like modify its own code and like recompile it and like put itself out there again. So um, I'm not sure if the mechanism is exactly the same, but
Yeah,
I
that sounds
think
interesting.
that's the one thing that came to mind.
Well, and that's is that like an example of genetic programming actually, where the AST itself is kind of like tweaking itself and sort of adding new nodes? Yeah, like AST, by the way, abstract syntax tree. This is sort of how a computer program is represented in memory, where each
Mm.
operation of this program is a node in this vast tree. And there's this concept called genetic programming where an individual node might sort of expand itself into a set of nodes, or it might delete itself. And in this way, you're sort of like modifying a program as it's running and potentially improving an
Hmm.
algorithm or coming up with new ways to solve a problem.
That just reminded me, sorry, you were talking about long language learning models. It's also a problem in using them in medicine is that what are your result result variables. So like if I wanted to use that X-ray example and say like, okay, we're going to feed this a bunch of X-rays and we're going to have this thing tell us if it's pneumothorax or not. What is telling us what it if it is or not? Is it the radiologist, or is it you doing an invasive procedure to determine if it actually is pneumonia, like a
Right.
pneumonia or pneumothorax? So sometimes the our what we know is the output is not known. Like
Right.
sometimes even like for example in trauma, if we have an algorithm that tells you whether a kidney is injured or not, how would you really know unless you went in there and operated and looked at the kidney? You could not be 100% certain. So maybe we're feeding in incorrect information into these large language models, which makes it also difficult.
Yeah.
Well, this actually goes back to a question that I had while you were talking is it seems like in some cases, I don't want to sound like I'm advocating that we like do away with patient privacy, but like if there's like laws about patient confidentiality that kind of interfere with our ability to share as much information as we would want in
Oh,
these
100%.
databases.
But
Yeah.
in some European countries that have socialized medicine, they kind of do away with those barriers, and your data's kind of out there for researchers to use. I'm not saying those countries are the worst and there you shouldn't do that. I'm just saying that's a different that probably would never fly in America and would like
I think it should be
where
that
people
way.
were.
I think it should be anonymized, but it seems like we could move. Well, I don't know. Again, I'm like naive. I'm not a part of the medical establishment, so I know nothing. But it does seem like we could sort of, expand the bubble of knowledge by just sharing data and having it available.
No, 100%, and that has to do also with just the fragmentation of information in our health infrastructure. So like there's I'll just tell you there's a million ways to do a hernia, like a repair surgery. There's right now there and whenever there's a million ways to do something, there's no 100% right way to do something.
Right.
But no one like everyone's like, "Oh, my way's the best, my way's the best." But say you do a hernia repair and your patient has a recurrence 10 days after you see them in the clinic and so, oh, I did a great job, and then they go on their way. 10 days afterwards they have a recurrence. They go to a different surgeon and say, I have a recurrence. That original surgeon will have no idea that person had a recurrence unless they come to see them again. That's not
Right.
floating in the database to show, oh, that was an issue with, that guy had a recurrence 40, 50 days out. That just disappears basically, that this person had a recurrence from that surgeon's ability to understand his complications.
Wow.
This is something that's always frustrated me about like my interactions with the medical system is the like I don't own my data. Like there, like I wish I could have like a USB drive or some chip or something. Maybe there's something that's on me. It's like okay, whatever notes you put about me, like put them on this little thing that I have and I can carry to,
So you
or
can
because
request your
like
data.
another ideal system would be like there's one centralized system, but that feels like I mean unrealistic in some ways.
Yeah, they again, it could be done if it was important to people who make money and things like that, or if Congress was pushed by its constituents to do that. But I don't think anyone even knows this is a problem to know to advocate it for it or care about it. But that would be super helpful for again the simple case of hernias where we don't know. Again, these people disappear. We think, oh, I did a great job, and then someone, they went somewhere else.
Wild.
Was there anything else you had, Jeremy? Or
Let's see. Just some interesting things that happened since this guy published this. So, multiple different types of RNA have been found since he's published it. Double-stranded RNA, microRNA, which both are feedback mechanisms to basically destroy RNA strands if so they don't get translated into protein.
Mm.
mRNA editing. So there's this whole thing called spliceosomes. I think he talked a
Mhm.
little about it, but I thought it was interesting. I don't know if he mentioned this, but the promoters can be in regions of the DNA that are being read. Like there's introns and extrons. It could be in an intron of the DNA that's promoting it to be read. So I thought that was interesting.
Hmm.
Just really complex stuff, and it's difficult to have analog to coding. It's really difficult again in a situation where you're having linear inputs and three-dimensional outputs, that it's really more important that what the three-dimensional output is than kind of the code itself.
I think that I mean, if I'm just thinking like high level takeaways, the thing that's the craziest and maybe the most dissimilar to coding is like it would be as if you wrote code that was like a compiler that would then go do something else. It's like it's so self-referential because you're like you have this sequence of DNA and now this is making some enzyme that's going to catalyze some other thing that happened, like when you're coding, you ideally want your system to be like very clearly like all of the layers should be self-contained and they shouldn't be like affecting one another. But in life it seems like that's happening all over the place.
Yeah. But I wonder, I mean, I don't think we could even conceive coding with there's so much self referring, but it probably would be more efficient to do so if we could magically think that complexly.
Dude, that's the kind of code LLMs would probably produce, once they become super intelligent.
Yeah, 100%.
Thank you so much for joining us, Jeremy. This is, I don't know, this was super cool to just hear about your thoughts on, from a more like informed perspective about DNA and the human body.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
All right. Well, have a good rest of your day, guys.
Bye-bye.